everybody. Welcome to our mid-year room 2. This is Parliamentary Procedures with Jen Crowell. So just want to introduce you real quick. Jen is the past Key Club Lieutenant Governor. She's a past Circle K District Editor and Treasurer for Pennsylvania. She earned a little bit of a reputation as being a troublemaker. She was a very active delegate in House during her time as Key Club and Circle K board member, which is how she ended up with the chair position for the district. She got up and read Robert's rules from the con mic once and Circle K icon because she disagreed with the parliamentarian, and yeah, here she is. So all you have to do is start a little trouble to get a chair position, I guess. So Jen, go ahead. The floor is yours.
So my name's actually Crowell. There's no M in the middle.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
So that's okay. I just had to tease Sean since we're friends. So yeah, I have been, everybody can hear me, right? So I've spent a fair amount of time at the microphone in House Delegates in Key Club and in Circle K. So I became pretty familiar with parliamentary procedure. It's also something you use if you like to debate and like to argue, if you're in high school and on the debate team kind of stuff. So it's extremely useful. But today we're going to talk about how it's useful to your club and why you should make sure you're using it or make sure you're following it. So let me see if I get my presentation to start. Can everybody see the presentation?
We see it, we're good.
Okay. Move the chat window so that I can see it. All right. So why bother with parliamentary procedure? Well, the short answer is that you have to. We're required to do it. State laws expect that nonprofits and not-for-profit corporations do use it. Our bylaws specify that Robert's Rules is our parliamentary authority. I don't know if you can see the book. So we're bound by it because it's in our bylaws. More importantly, it makes our decisions official. So we are functioning as a corporation, and your board, when you make your club and your board, when you make a binding motion for your club to do something, it's an official decision. So from a risk management perspective and under our insurance and everything else your club is bound by, especially when money is involved, you want to make sure you follow all the proper procedures when you pass a motion to have your club take action. But more importantly, they're actually very useful and practical. Most people think Robert's Rules is very archaic and not very useful, but it's entirely not true. It's actually super helpful, and they can help you keep your meetings on track. So what happens when there's no order? Well, have you ever been to a meeting like this? It seemed to take forever to agree on the most basic decisions. And bonus points if everybody seemed to agree and you still couldn't move on. The president or chair didn't have control of the group. People talked over each other disruptively and not just accidentally. Accidentally isn't such a big deal, but if people are intentionally yelling over each other, then you definitely have total disorder. Some people never get a chance to speak at all, even though they're trying. You walked away feeling like someone or something was railroaded, pushed through without the approval of most of the membership, or attendees walked away with different understandings of what you actually decided. So people were unclear about what was actually done during the meeting, which all means that there wasn't a whole lot of process or order going on in that meeting. So how can Robert's Rules help you? So parliament procedure is based on general rules and wisdom for group decision making. So most of it is actually pretty common sense. Discussions work best when one person talks at a time. Everyone who wants to participate and attend has a chance to offer their opinion. Every member's right to vote is protected. So with Robert's Rules, it protects the opinions of the minority, but also makes sure that fair decisions are made. Members understand exactly what they are voting on. The motion gets repeated. This is what we're discussing. This is what we're voting on, so that everyone is clear on exactly what action the club is going to take. It allows meetings to run smoothly when everyone's in agreement. And then at the times when everybody's not in agreement, it makes sure decisions are made fairly. So all parliamentary procedure does is provide rules that make these things happen. So some things to remember about Robert's Rules, as I already said, most of the rules are just common sense. The chair of the meeting should never be stricter than is necessary for the good of the meeting. So if the meeting is very loose and everything is running smoothly, the chair doesn't need to crack down on every single little thing as long as they keep the meeting running. So it doesn't have to be rigid. It can be very just kind of let it go as long as it stays within the framework of order and Robert's rules. There are special provisions for small groups that allow them to be more informal than a large one. And at the end of the day, it's really just about getting business done efficiently and fairly. Orderly meetings get more accomplished, and our members want to be part of clubs that make an impact. And if we spend the whole meeting squabbling, we're not making a good impact in our community. So this is some common terminology. You're going to hear these words a lot. You're not always going to be too worried about their meanings, but it helps to be very familiar with them. So parliamentary procedure is just the set of rules that govern how business gets conducted. Can somebody let me know if I'm talking too fast? I tend to do that. Am I okay?
You're doing just fine, Jen.
Okay, thank you. An assembly is a group of people meeting to discuss and determine common action. So that's what we are. We're called a deliberative assembly. People choose to be part of the membership and choose to participate. So we have gathered to make decisions together to do more good as a group than we could do as individuals. A motion, which is the probably most important term in Robert's rules, is a proposal by a member in a meeting that the assembly take an action. It's often also referred to as a question. So a main motion is the initial proposal that brings business before the group. So someone gets up and they make a motion that we do X. And a secondary motion is any subsequent proposal that changes that question. It can change it in substance, where some minor substitution is made in the language. And it can also change it in procedure, to decide that we should tackle this at our next meeting instead of tackling it today. A second is a one-word statement of agreement that a motion is worthy of further discussion and consideration. The floor is metaphorically the space where things are put before the assembly. So the literal definition of the floor is the space where the members sit and from which they speak. But really, it's that sort of space where things are presented to the group and where things are discussed. So a motion is on the floor when it is pending before the group. A member has the floor when they have been recognized to speak by the chair. And when that member is finished, the member yields the floor so the chair can recognize others to speak. So only one person is speaking on the floor officially at any given time. Helps with the order. So a quorum is the minimum number of people required to conduct official business. In different scenarios, this is defined explicitly at the club level, at the district level, at the divisional level. So later in the presentation, we have specific club rules that are referenced, but it's always set. You must have this representation in order to conduct official business. The table, this one gets misused a little bit sometimes, and we'll talk about that later. But it's a place where items can be removed from the floor and placed in the care of the secretary, technically the secretary's table, allowing other business to be conducted immediately. So if something were to come up that was urgent and you're working on this particular motion, someone can move to place it in the care of the secretary so that something else can be done immediately, and then you can go back to it. So to lay something on the table is a secondary motion made against the pending question to put the item on the table, and to take it from the table is to bring it back onto the floor. Notice is a heads up that you have to give in advance of special meetings. We all have an annual meeting every May April or May, that has to be held before May 15th. And you have to give 30 days notice of the date of your annual meeting. If you want to do a bylaw amendment to your club bylaws, that has to be sent out and given notice to your members so they know the language you're planning to vote on and the date that you're planning to propose it. Bylaws, by the way, are the rules that govern a specific organization. So you have bylaws at the club level, we have bylaws also at the district and the international level. And those are all the provisions that help us run the organization. The presiding officer is the chairperson of the meeting. Normally that's your club president. But if your president is absent, it can be a vice president, it can be your secretary. There's usually a provision in the in your club bylaws or in your club policies, which are at the end of your club bylaws, about who takes over. If necessary, it's just the next ranking officer, or any officer could really run the meeting in the absence of the president. Or if the president is sick, right, they lost their voice that day because they had a cold, they can ask somebody else to run the meeting. So a delegate is any member of the assembly who has voting privileges. So at the club level, all of your members who have paid their dues and are in good standing are delegates. At a divisional meeting, a district convention, an international convention, clubs specify which members are voting on behalf of the club. So if you have 10 people go to international convention, you're only allowed to have 3 delegates. So your club specifies who has voting privileges to represent the club. A parliamentarian is a person with knowledge of these procedures who advises members and leaders on how to conduct business. As the bylaws and policy chair, I serve as parliamentarian district convention, but I'm not a certified parliamentarian. There is an actual group of people who are paid to do this professionally. I'm not one of those, but they exist. A parliamentary authority is a set of procedural rules adopted by an organization. In Kiwanis, we use Robert's Rules of Order. There are actually other ones that are less common, but Robert's Rules is the one that matters for us. And precedence is a ranking order in which rules are enforced. So different motions have precedence of which ones are higher ranking than others. And documents that define our organizational rules also have a ranking of precedence. So for clubs, and this is different at every level, this is the ranking of the way the documents govern how your club runs. So at the top is laws and statutes. Nothing our clubs do can violate federal law or state law, no matter what you have in your bylaws. Same goes for your club's articles of incorporation. So clubs should be incorporated and you have to follow those, and those take precedence over your club bylaws for a similar reason as the fact that our clubs have to follow the law. After your club bylaws, anything that is in a lower document, you look to for guidance when your club bylaws don't specify. Most clubs bylaws are only a few pages long, so not all provisions are going to be covered. So the next thing is the Kiwanis International bylaws. And if it's not there, the Kiwanis International policies and procedures. And if it's not there, then the district bylaws. You'll still fall through a whole lot of procedural questions that don't need to be specified because they're in Robert's Rules of Order, which is down there near the bottom. Standing rules at the very, very bottom are customs and things that are just the way business is normally conducted. You'll see this particularly at district convention and international convention, where we have standing rules for the House that we adopt that have built-in provisions of how much time we allow for debate, how much time speakers get, things like that. So we don't have to make up new rules every single time. We have a set of established customs, we agree to use them, and then those are enforced for the meeting. Those can't contradict anything higher up in the pyramid, but they allow for a little bit of custom and sort of things to be, people to be used to a rhythm to how things work in-house, because you do have a lot of people who in Kiwanis who go every year. And so it's helpful to sort of have a set of established rules that are customary for our organization. So do you know how to find your club's bylaws? Every club has them. So luckily I live with our club secretary as my spouse, so he was able to get screenshots on how to find them for me. So when your club president or your club secretary log in to Kiwanis, what we used to call Kiwanis One, but now call Kiwanis Connect, they have this button on the left side right there for your club bylaws. And if you click on that, it will take you to the club bylaw management system. Now this page will allow you to download a PDF copy of your existing bylaws and also to start the process of amending your bylaws. It is important to know that your bylaw changes are not in effect until they have been approved by Kiwanis International. So even if your club makes a change off to the side, it's not real until it's been submitted and approved to KI. So the version you download here from KI is your current official version of your club's bylaws. Does anybody have any questions so far? I'm watching the chat. I don't see any yet, but if you, I'll pause for a second.
Jen, we have a question here.
Okay.
This was from Bill Walters. Do you have to vote to approve the financial report, or can it be placed on file for audit?
What, can you be more specific about the type of financial report, right? Your budget, like your club budget, your treasurer's report. I'm not sure what particularly.
Talking about the monthly talking about the monthly treasurer's report.
So it depends on what's in your club's policies, right? Normally we do tend to, you don't necessarily have to approve like reports, but everybody's set of customs is different. If you do wish to approve that, it would probably be good to do so by like unanimous consent and do it if no one objects. But I don't know if it's strictly required at the club level. You would need to double check the bylaws. I can check the standard form and get back to you.
Well,
it's not a question that comes up all the time.
I follow that because Robert's rule says it can be placed on file.
It can, right? Unless your club bylaws specify you're supposed to vote on it.
They do
Hence
not.
the ranking and precedence from the
Club
then you
bylaws
can place it on
don't
file.
require it.
Then you can place it on file. And if a member wants further information, right, they can make a motion to have something investigated to talk about an item in the report, right? But it could be placed on file as long as it's consistent with all of the rules. Members can always make a motion for a point of information to ask for more detail. But whether or not a specific item has to be approved is based on what the governing documents say. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
All right, thanks. Okay, so some basic parliamentary stuff. Official business can't be conducted until the meeting is called to order. Any delegate other than the chair can make a motion after being recognized to speak. So you can't make a motion until the chair has recognized you as having the floor. Motions must be seconded by another delegate to ensure two people feel the motion's worth considering. The seconder does not necessarily need to agree to the motion. They just need to agree to bring it for discussion. So if something's contentious and people are arguing, you can still agree to bring it up to the club, even if you don't agree with the actual motion. It's the chair's job to determine whether a motion is in order. So even if you have a parliamentarian, they're not directly responsible. They're there to advise the chair. But the chair can seek guidance on whether or not it's in order if they're not certain. And if any member believes the chair is not following the procedure, they can make a point of order, which is an interjection, if they believe their procedural rules are not being followed. Sorry. It is very important to keep track of which motion is currently on the floor. I'm going to show you some diagrams to walk you through how the process of a motion works. And most of the time when people make a mistake with respect to motions and what the current question is, it's really because they lost their place. And as opposed to actually tracking exactly where they are. Sorry, my slideshow got a little messed up there. Okay, so we're going to walk through the life cycle of how a motion works. So step one is to be recognized by the chair. So if you are at a meeting, raise your hand, ask the chair, get the chair's attention and say, hey, I'd like to say something. And that will the chair will recognize you. In a really small meeting, it could just be the chair pointing at you and nodding their head at you if you were at a small club gathered around a table. But if it's a bigger meeting, you're going to want to make sure that you get formally recognized and it's obvious who has been recognized because only one person can have the floor. Step two is to make the motion. So make the proposal. I move that we do X. I move that we spend X dollars on this project. I move that we donate Y to this organization. I move that we have an event in this month. All of these are examples of a proposal that gets brought before the club. Another member has to second. The second is impromptu. The chair does not have to invite it. So if someone is ready to shout out a second, no one has to ask, is there a second? Unless the chair is just making sure that people have the opportunity. But generally the second can just be shouted out. The chair should repeat the motion back. So the chair will read the motion back so everybody's sure, everybody is certain exactly what they're going to discuss. This step is having the chair state the question that is put on the floor for debate. So at the time the chair repeats it is when the motion is officially on the floor and ready for discussion. During the discussion phase, the chair will recognize individual speakers to speak for or against the proposal. If an issue is contentious, it helps for the chair to try to identify who is planning to speak for it, who is planning to speak against it. So you can alternate between pro and con opinions. If you ever attend a convention, you will often see that there are separate microphones, an in-person convention, that there are separate microphones for people speaking for and people speaking against to help keep that alternating. But in a club, you may not always have the ability to identify that clearly. So you will want to have the chair ask if you think an issue is contentious. So after this, you vote on the chair will call for a vote. Ask for people who are voting in the affirmative, ask for people who are voting in the negative, and the majority will rule. So debate is, it's important to remember that the person who makes the motion always has the right to speak first. So after the chair repeats the motion, they should look to the member who made the motion to see if they wish to speak. Now, once you get to recognizing delegates in a virtual or hybrid meeting, you can use the raise hand button in Zoom. You can have people post in the chat whether or not they wish to speak. Are my slides not showing?
No, I don't see them, Jen.
They were playing, hang on. My apologies. Did you see the slides with the motion walkthrough? Did that get lost too? I'll go back.
I think I got lost.
Sorry, guys. All right, so the life cycle of a motion, can everybody see it now?
Here we go.
Okay, so the life cycle we walked through before, get recognized by the chair, make the motion, second the motion, chair repeats the motion, group discusses the motion, and then you vote on the motion. So as I was saying, in a virtual or hybrid meeting, you would want to have members raise their hands. Either they can raise them on screen if everyone's on video, or use the raise hand button to let the chair know they wish to speak. All other members need to be able to hear the arguments made by the member who has the floor. So you have to be able to make sure everyone can communicate. If you're in a hybrid setting, you have to make sure everyone can hear everyone else, no matter how you set up your hybrid meeting. No delegate should speak twice on the same question if any member who has not spoken who wishes to speak on the motion. And with the exception of provisions we'll talk about later, the chair cannot participate in the debate on the merit of the motion unless they relinquish the chair. If they relinquish the chair, they can't get it back until after the pending question, the current motion, has been completed. So now let's talk about secondary motions. This isn't a complete set of secondary motions, but it's the ones that you're most likely to encounter. So several motions are debatable, several motions are not debatable. So the first one is the one you'll encounter most common, which is the motion to amend, which is to change the details of the main motion. So if someone votes to, we're going to spend $1,500 on this project, and another person thinks it's too much, they can vote to amend the motion to change the dollar amount down to 1,000. To refer or to commit, send is a motion to try to send the item to committee for further investigation before being brought back to the group. Or to postpone to a certain time would pause the debate on the motion or end any secondary motions to basically put it off to a future meeting. So if you have a very packed agenda, currently most people are using the free version of Zoom, so you have a tight time limit on your meeting. So if you have a lot of things to go over, you may not have the time to debate the motion this month, and it may not be urgent. So you may be able to say, okay, we're going to postpone it and do it next month. If you postpone to a certain time, then it automatically goes on the agenda for the meeting you postpone it to. These three motions are debatable, meaning that the topic becomes open for discussion. But in all cases, you immediately discuss the merit of the secondary motion. You were no longer talking about the main motion at all, only about the secondary motion. So it's whether or not to amend, whether or not to refer, and whether or not to postpone. You have to finish those motions before you go back to the main motion. So there are other secondary motions that are undebatable. So if they are moved and seconded, they proceed immediately to a vote. One of them is to lay on the table, to pause current discussion on certain business and come back to it later. Division of the question is to break a motion into parts. They must be able to stand alone, but if you want to divide something into sections and vote on it as individual sections, that's division of a question. You can make a motion to limit debate to only allocate a certain amount of time, or you can make a motion to end debate and move immediately to a vote. The last two motions require a 2/3 vote because they change the right of members to speak. So one of the things Robert's Rules does is to protect the right of the minority to make sure they have a chance to have their opinions heard. And so those two items that actually change the members' opportunity to speak require a 2/3 vote in order to pass. So this is a visual to explain how that second life cycle goes off on its own, and you have to finish it before you go back to the main motion. So during the discussion, the secondary motion is made. Now we move on to this green loop, right? We cannot talk about the blue loop anymore until we are done with the green loop, right? So you have all the same steps again. Move the amendment, second the motion to amend, repeat, the chair has to repeat back the motion to amend. You discuss the motion to amend and you vote on the motion to amend. Depending on the outcome of that vote, when you go back to the blue life cycle, you may be dealing with the modified version or the original version if the amendment fails. You would follow the same pattern if it's a different type of secondary motion, but amendments are the most common. So I have an example of a motion to amend, and our moderator is actually the one who gave this exact example, so I get to embarrass him a little bit. So at the 2019 International Convention, there was a non-discrimination amendment proposed by Honest International. The original amendment is on the left. So there was no clause in this amendment for gender identity. So the Pennsylvania district, Mr. Sean Smith, made an amendment to change the wording to strike out certain words and insert other words in its place. The amendment, this is an example of how the amendment was worded. Now this is the way it passed. So after the amendment cycle was approved, the modified version of amendment is the version that was finally passed by by the Kiwanis International House of Delegates at that convention.
Jen,
so the ways, yeah.
We have a question from Shane.
Okay.
Shane,
Okay.
if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Jen, I just want to clarify this because I have been in this situation. If there is an initial motion made and it is seconded and it goes to the floor for discussion, and then there is an amendment made to that, and it comes back into the second cycle that you were referring to, what happens to the initial motion? Is it, you keep saying we're absolutely done with that, but I just want to make sure that that's clear, that if it's amended and we have a second to that, that we're now referring only to the second amendment.
So, right. So I went back to this. Can you see the slide with the second life cycle again? So once you make that amendment and it's seconded and it is repeated by the chair, so that the amendment is on the floor, you are only able to discuss the merits of the amendment until the amendment has been voted on. Now, yes, it's possible for other secondary branches to start from here, but I'm going to keep it simple and make it just a single amendment. You have to finish this green life cycle before you can move back to the blue one. The outcome of the vote will affect what you're voting on when you move back to discussion of the original main motion, right? So in the case of an amendment, if you pass the modification, you are now discussing the modified main motion when you go back to the blue one. But you can't skip any steps, right? So if you treat this as if it's like you path on a board game, you've got to move your piece through all of the marks before you can get back to discussion of the original main motion, potentially with the wording changed. But you have to get back onto that original life cycle, and you have to finish the side life cycle to get there. Does that answer your question?
I think you did a good
does.
job at
Thank
answering
you very
that.
much.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I don't run out of time.
Have 2
So
minutes, Jen.
how can the cycle end? I know, I gotta get to nominations and elections. So most of the time this will end in a vote. The items we talked about earlier, postponement, referring to committee, and tabling will actually, they're the only ones that will not go back to the main motion. If you approve any of those 3 items, the main motion will go off to the side with the amendment, right? Or with the secondary motion, right? So if you choose to table it, the entire stack gets tabled. If you choose to postpone it to next month, the entire stack gets postponed. If you choose to refer it to committee, all of it gets sent to committee. Everything else requires a separate vote on the main motion. So you vote on the amendment, but voting on the amendment does not mean you voted on the main motion. It only means you voted on the amendment. So those special procedures for small groups that I mentioned, which are probably going to help you in your club meetings. There's no limit to the number of times that a small group will allow a person to speak on the same debatable question. However, you should always make sure that people who haven't had a chance to speak yet speak before people who are speaking multiple times. But that immediate limit of you can't speak more than once, or you can't speak more than twice doesn't apply. You're able to discuss informally when there's no motion on the floor, so you can relax the rules and not worry about all of the recognized speaking if there's not a motion on the floor. You can move a motion and take and start the process of a vote without the formal move and second if everyone is clear. However, the chair should read it back to make sure that everyone's clear on what the vote is before the final vote's taken. And if the chair is a member in a small group setting only, they can, without leaving the chair, speak in informal discussions and debate and vote without withholding their vote to see if it actually will change the result. So generally you would want the chair as a best practice to wait to speak to the end so they don't overtly influence the position of the members. But in a small group setting, they are allowed to speak on the motion without relinquishing the chair. So holding your club elections in a virtual environment. So most of the provisions of club elections remain exactly the same. Your annual meeting has to be held on the same date. You still need to give the same amount of notice. You still have nominations that can be made in advance or made immediately prior to the election. And you still have to have a quorum to conduct business. Based on the standard form of club bylaws, this is the quorum requirement for clubs. 1/3 of the members in good standing need to be available to vote, and no less than a majority of the members present are required to approve all business, including elections. Now, luckily for all of us, all clubs were required to update to the standard form for club bylaws in 2013-14, which added these electronic balloting provisions. So we all have that built in because Kiwanis put it in the standard form 7 years ago. So that was actually very prescient and helps us quite a bit during this pandemic that everyone has those provisions. Now, KI put out guidelines for electronic voting last year. If you are having virtual or hybrid meetings, then and your elections are not contested, you can still, as you would in a normal meeting, have the club secretary cast a unanimous ballot if there is only one vote, only one candidate for office, and then the ballot can be approved by a voice vote. Anytime you take a voice vote using a tool, make sure you unmute every single person eligible to vote, because otherwise you won't be able to hear them. They need to be given their opportunity to have their voice heard, whether it's aye or nay. If you do have a contested election, KI recommended a list of particular tools, SurveyMonkey, Election Buddy, Election Runner, and simplyvoting.com. Any of them will work, but you'll want to set them up in advance. If it's possible for your members to access the electronic voting tool, if you're in a hybrid location and some people are physically there and some people are at home, it makes sense to try to get all members to use the online tool to maximize anonymity. So elections should be a secret ballot. We should do everything we can to protect the rights of the members to vote in a secret ballot when it's a contested election. So if possible to get the people who are there physically to use the electronic ballot, you would want to have them do so. Otherwise, you would have to do a hybrid of electronic ballots and paper ballots, which is still secret, but less anonymous. Email balloting is always discouraged because it does not enable the voting to occur on a secret ballot. The link in here has the guidelines that KI put out, so I'll make sure this presentation is available to everybody when we're done, assuming I believe the district's going to make everyone's presentations available. And lieutenant governor elections are the last thing I have to throw in here, which is that the notice is a lot shorter for lieutenant governor elections, but we should do much better than what is actually required in the bylaws, right? So with a lieutenant governor election, you're going to need to know who the delegates are from the individual clubs. The lieutenant governor may not know exactly who a club wants their voting privileges to be. So make sure you coordinate with your lieutenant governor, or if you are the lieutenant governor, coordinate with your clubs and make sure that you know who the voting delegates are. So you know who would get unmuted or who should have access to the electronic voting tool, so that the correct people and only the correct people have the right to vote in a lieutenant governor election.
Jen, thank you very much for joining us tonight. The resources are there on your screen. We will also post this video on our district website in the next couple days. So thank you very much. The links to the next forums are in your chat box. If you are joining the virtual fundraiser, click on the link below. If you are staying for actually, there's no things left in here. I lied. There is,
That might not be.
here we go, sorry. If you're joining There's No Strength Without Struggle with Jim Janosic, click on the link below his information. We will see everybody in a couple minutes.